before the pandemic, Currency House was pretty much winding down. And in fact, we had, at the last board meeting, we had actually decided to actually wind up Currency House. And then when the pandemic hit, it actually gave us an opportunity to just rethink all what we were doing. And Justin McDonald came along and offered to do a review, on an ANZART review of us. And he suggested that we should actually continue, that there were aspects of the organisation that were still viable. And because I have a background in bookkeeping, I was going through the books with Jodine Muir, our wonderful treasurer. And I realised that we could actually make the organisation viable by closing the office. And really the point of that was to get rid of all the retail aspects of Currency House, because Currency House is kind of set up as a mirror of Currency Press, and so it meant we were just duplicating a lot of what they did, but looking for donations to sustain it. And so by contracting out all those kind of retail aspects to other organisations, what I want to do is actually transition Currency House to being more like a research centre. So we'll continue to publish, we'll continue to do our events, but we'll, with the assistance of other partners. But our main function will be to look at the research that's been done in the platform papers over all these years and see what can be developed from that, what's still viable and what we can kind of produce out of it. So not just as a publication, but also see if we can actually turn them into projects and things like that. So kind of branch out into other kinds of areas. And the foundation of all of that is the Platform Papers series. So one thing that we will be doing is bringing out a complete new e-edition of all the past Platform Papers with the support of Ian Maxwell from the Sydney University. And then we want to make, I do want to redevelop the website. So the website will become like the new virtual hub of Currency House as opposed to the bricks and mortar office. What I'm hoping to come out of this convention is I'd like to produce what is essentially a cultural policy that brings together all the aspects of all the things that all the authors have written about over all these years and kind of finds ways of integrating them into a single kind of vision for what should be going on in the arts. And that can be like something that we continue to build on over the years. But I think Currency House's role should be that role of integrating rather than just adding, stacking on more essays, publications each time. If we can start to integrate, I think that's really what we need to do now, especially at this time because of the pandemic and so on, how it's changing the economy and changing our political economy, our democracy really. I think in order to be ready to meet the challenges of those changes, we need to look at how we can integrate what we've achieved so far into like a single consistent kind of philosophy. We should talk. I'll hand over to you.
Do you want to?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Harriet, and hello, everyone. So Harriet's given me about 15 minutes, and the practical aspects of what we're calling the new platform papers would really take about 30 seconds. But then when I came to make some notes, I realised that there's a context here that's quite important. And I hope you give me a little leeway here, because I'm going to try and talk a little bit more personally and perhaps a little bit from the heart. I first made contact with Catherine Brisbane in the late 90s. I was finishing my PhD and had written on the Nimrod Theatre, sent her a couple of chapters. She had responded positively. And then before I knew it, I was at her retirement dinner in Sydney. And I remember thinking, I didn't really belong there. I was very junior. Everybody else seemed to be enormously important. And I was a sort of bystander, really, or I suppose somebody in the passenger seat. Then in 2012 or 13, Catherine asked me to join the editorial committee of the platform papers. And my experience was kind of like a reprise of that. Again, I was the youngest in the room, or felt myself to be the most junior. And again, I felt myself to be in the passenger seat, which is pretty, oh, are we right? Okay. Which is, I think in a way, the story of my life is kind of watching other people take decisions and watching other people take risks. Then a couple of years ago, and this is the important bit, Catherine said to the editorial committee that it was time for her to step away. And because I was so used to sort of just bumping along with what other people said and thought, listening to it and adding my own 2 cents worth, I didn't really get involved in, you know, what is rather lamely called succession planning. But what then happened was basically a kind of nothing for 2 years. And it wasn't a kind of nothing because nobody was doing anything. On the contrary, we were all working incredibly hard. It was a kind of nothing because something had stopped. Some whatever momentum it was that was providing sense to the platform papers, but more broadly, Currency House, but more broadly, Australian culture, but more broadly, Australia. All of those things, all of those stories, if you like, which historians would call narrative supervenience in the way they all fit together. All of those things, it felt to me, I'm just talking personally here, it felt to me like all of those had just stopped all at the same time. And I was like, whoa, this is weird. What is this? This is not just kind of like, oh, the fridge is broken, fix it. This is not just like, oh, we need a new strategic plan. This was like, okay, it felt like kind of history itself had sort of stopped. And then as a way of sort of confirming that, or if you like, its objective correlative, as T.S. Eliot would say, the pandemic happened. And then things really did stop. But in my view, things had actually stopped before the pandemic hit. That's what it felt like. So then I did some thinking, and you know, my work is mainly in Australian history. And so I was thinking about Catherine, but also Philip, her husband, Harriet's father. And I was thinking about the vision of Australian theatre, as I often do, that came out of the 40s and the 50s, which is, you know, the period that I have come to know quite well. And I think that there is a unity. There was a unity to that vision, and you can follow it in the archives if you're so inclined. A unity about Australian theatre in particular, but Australia culture more generally, that then gets passed on into the 60s and the 70s. And the pluralism that we are used to thinking that culture is sort of bankrolled, I think, by that unity. It isn't really kind of a distinction between, oh, it's either kind of going to be one thing or it's going to be lots of things. It's more like they work together. So what I think, and I was explaining things to myself, is that pause, that halt, that thing where nothing worked all at the same time, was in some way because the unifying vision that allowed some kind of diversity had stopped. And because I get around, intellectually speaking, and you know, hang around with economists and historians and things like that, I began to see a pattern. And then I thought, I can't be in the passenger seat anymore. And my overwhelming feeling was of inadequacy, overwhelming. I thought, I haven't taken enough risks in my life. Who am I to say anything or do anything about this moment? But I felt I knew, and I think I still know that something else needs to happen. And at that point, I went, oh, okay, this is where we are. We need to be in a position where it's not about bright ideas or this is the thing that will, you know, sell for the next 10 years. You're at a position where, as I said earlier this morning, you're with a play that is never going to work. And so at that particular moment, as everybody who has been in a rehearsal room knows, there's only one thing you can do, and that's throw away the play, throw away the script, and start again. You've got to do it. And I say that as somebody who loves plays. So the spirit of the new platform papers, and as you can tell, Harriet is the financial brains, really, because I certainly am not. You know, the logistical side of it, I kind of leave to her in this kind of weird reversal of personalities. But I will back her to the hilt, because what I realized after meeting Harriet even a couple of times is she's got really great instincts. She knows the way forward. And I can tell you for a flat truth that in those 2 years when we were kind of stalled and in the mud, there was just no way forward. And I felt it. And you know, that is, as they say, knowledge on fire, not knowledge on ice. And so the need to get out of that and to find clear air and to start moving into a different direction, well, you do whatever it takes. So in a practical way, it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. There's still going to be platform papers. They will not be in print form anymore.
Oh, yes, they will be.
Oh, they will be.
Yes,
oh,
yes.
Well, there you go.
Sorry, we're doing, we're e-publishing them through the year, but then we're doing one collected print volume at the end of the year in December.
I bow to your superior wisdom. There'll probably be 3 a year, you know, rather than 4 a year. And there's a new level of remuneration for the authors, which you should announce.
Oh, well, because I spent so many years of my life being a creative artist, I feel very strongly about paying artists. And when I took on this position, it seemed to me, we paid a token fee of $1,500 per platform paper, which is not bad in the scheme of things, but it's not what I wanted to do was to hitch what our payment rates to a standard, because what I've observed over the years is that if you don't have a standard, then that's whatever amount you choose to pay, it just gets eroded and eroded and eroded, and you end up in the position that visual artists are in, and I'm sure many other artists are in, but you end up being paid a great opportunity and nothing at all, the promise of a job in the future. And so to avoid that, you have to use, you know, you have, as a bookkeeper, you have to pay the award wage. We don't have an award for these standards, but we have the Australian Society of Authors standards. And so I said, we must adopt this standard. And as a result, that means that we have a tenfold increase in the author's fee for a long essay for platform papers, which is now $15,000 a year. Wow. And this is important because from an artist's point of view, you know, that sustains you through a whole year. It's also, it's just a matter of principle that I just feel that we have to adhere to. Yes, it's bringing up all sorts of, it's not a simple matter of simply paying that fee, because then there are all these ramifications that come with it, that to do with how you decide to apply that, and it affects things to do with your choice of papers and so forth. So it really has to be integrated in the whole philosophy of the organisation, and that again is kind of part of what I was talking about before, where the restructuring of Currency House is not so much to do with the restructuring of it administratively, although we have done radical things like close the office. It really is about the restructuring philosophically of the whole organisation. It starts with these principles about paying standard fees.
Yeah, good. So you know, that fee is an expression of value.
Exactly.
I think
exactly.
we could say that, you know,
yes.
and when Harriet said that that's what she wanted to do, I did look at her like, oh, golly. But then from her point of view, that's a commitment for her personally to raise that money so that we can pay those authors. So it's not said lightly. My job to some extent is to work out what the practical ramifications are for the platform pitches. And we've had one editorial committee. Most of the old editorial committee have gone. There's one, Martin Portis, who stayed with us, but most of them took the opportunity to step away, which I think is kind of interesting. And I think that the fact that I didn't, in some way, reflects my junior status, well, since forever, really. And that, you know, my job here is to provide some kind of continuity between the platform papers as they existed and the new parameters as Harriet has described them. I just want to sort of say something here. It's really important because I know and respect all of those older editorial committee people greatly. In fact, I go and say I'm a kind of teenage adulator of them, really, in some ways, because I think they're just such impressive people. But at the same time, when you try something new, it doesn't come with a set of roadblocks. You know, that's just the reality. So I decided that given that Harriet's instincts were so good and she had the momentum that I had seen what it felt like when you didn't have that, that there was going to be a period of testing things out. So one of those is, well, how do you run a kind of theme, if you like, or an orientation, something that kind of gives a kind of sense of shape to a number of platform papers, while at the same time, you know, allowing people to write individually about what they're going to write about. So the answer is, you know, keep tuned in for the next exciting episode. It doesn't come in a formula. I can probably tell you that something that did work or seemed to work for quite some time was the balance in the platform papers between the ones that were art form specific and the ones that had a broader cultural and sometimes social reach. And sometimes I was involved in the practical editing of those, at least a couple. And I remember getting to the end of the year going, that feels like we got the balance right. So that's a good thing. Another kind of obviously practical thing is if you kind of pay somebody that kind of money as an expression of value. So it's not a question of whether $15,000 is a lot of money, because I'm sure for some people it isn't, but it is for us. So, you know, we're kind of digging deep, as they say. Then what you look for is kind of a little bit more of a systematic effort. Not that anybody here would not have given that effort anyway for their platform papers, but going forward, the expectation would be a little bit more explicit. And I just say that because from time to time, we do get these pitches on platform papers, which are basically repurposed books. And you're like, well, this doesn't look like it's an essay. This looks like it's a Rutledge pitch. And it's been sort of cut down a bit. So what we're trying to do with the platform papers at the moment is just go back to Catherine's original vision for the essays, and then just restate basically what it is. You know, something that I hear a lot is that, you know, arts and culture are a tool. Creativity is a tool. It's a tool to do something like this. That is, as philosophers say, that's a category mistake. That is completely the wrong way of looking at art and culture. Art and culture are a mode of inquiry. They are a type of knowledge. And so when you put all the platform papers together, all the ones that we've written, you put them all together, they do actually form a coherent body of work. A body of work that you know and that I know has been excluded from public consciousness and public policy making to I think, a detrimental degree. So there is a sort of intention. I was about to say hope, but it's more than hope. It's an intention to stick the wheel back on the car, to make the connection between the platform paper series as a body of work and all the other conversations that are happening, you know, in our society, which I think, and again, this would be, for me, this would be a good example of Harriet's instinct, why we began with economics today. We weren't really talking about economics. We were talking about everything. We were talking about our lives. We were talking about what we want to do, why some of us are getting fucked over completely. But the the language that we can use, like a kind of international language of respectable communication, is economics, because it allows us to use words like value and cost and price and all of those other things, exchange and equilibrium. And even though those concepts have been eroded within mainstream economics, of course they were once noble ideas. So we're, I was aware, and again, this comes from, not from my strength of mind, not from my crucial insight, but from my paralysis, and from the 2 years of just watching the wheels spin around. I thought, there is a conversation going on here, a broader conversation about our nation, possibly our planet, and that conversation has to include arts and culture, has to. Not as a matter of respect for arts and culture, but just because, as the speakers earlier today kind of intimated, we are a very important part of how we know things. And I've studied, in particular, I've studied the problem of commensurability, which Richard Bronx mentioned this morning. I've studied it in detail, agonizing detail, to the point where I feel like I could scrub it out of my skin if I tried. And I know, and it's that problem that has made me realize the disconnection between the different kinds of narratives that we are currently a part of. So I think the theme of narrative earlier this morning was the correct one, but it doesn't look like one bolt of cloth. It looks like a series of smaller stories, all of which need to be brought together. And I think that defines the task, or will define the task, of the platform papers going forward.
Yeah,